So I think we're going to get started here
You
now.
good?
Um, but
Cool.
I think that's kind of a good segue, and at least from my perspective, I feel like most people know you through your work with the film and arts and, innovation and entrepreneurship. But when we were together, over the past couple times, I've learned about your involvement, in the soda pop district, and we were
Yes.
talking about that and your idea to, hey, we should, I invited you and you're like, oh, we should do it about the soda pop district. And I was like, that's actually a really good idea.
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about that. And I guess if you could just give us a little background on the non-Cucalorus, the non-film and art stuff that you've been involved in and kind of paint that
Yeah.
picture.
When I graduated from college, I came back to Wilmington. I worked briefly at the St. John's Museum of Art, which is
Hmm.
now the Cameron Art Museum. Before it became the Cameron Art Museum, it was downtown. Um, I had a studio at Acme Art for a while
Hmm.
and was really a very active part of the sort of visual arts community. And I was looking for a studio at one point, and my dad was like, and I was looking at these like old buildings that were romantic and brick, and
Yeah.
were going to be very expensive to even think about. And my dad was like, there's an old metal building near the new fire department. At the time, the fire department was new,
Yes.
which it used to be the Cricket Inn. It was a motel when I was a kid. Um, and it was like, oh man, it was like a really crappy color. It was boarded up. Coca-Cola used it to store their old files and all their old like Christmas decorations and whatnot.
Hmm.
Um, and most people were looking at it were going to tear it down. It was like that building's not worth anything. And I had done a summer job working on old houses and doing some roof work
Hmm.
with a guy named William Waltz. And so I knew just enough to where I was like, I could fix this roof. I could actually use this building. And those metal buildings are nice because in the inside, you don't really have to worry about it. There's no structural walls or anything. So you can kind of do a little more without having to have an engineer involved.
Hmm.
And so I bought this building on the corner of Ninth and Princess. Um, and they're really, the, the neighborhood has the way I describe it, my experience in the neighborhood has been three different moments. So when I came, Coca-Cola was still operating. It
Right.
still had a dominant presence in the whole neighborhood. Trucks ran 24 hours a day. I mean, and then they were on multiple blocks. They fixed the soda machines, the vending machines in one building. They fixed trucks in
No
another
way.
building, and the main building was really just a distribution center, but all sorts of things were happening in that building 24 hours a day.
And what
Um,
time frame was that,
this
would you
was
say?
in the early 2000s.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And I was already working for Cucalorus, but Cucalorus was still just a baby, to be honest.
Hmm.
We were starting to build some infrastructure around Cucalorus, but our office was still at the end of the Heinberg Agency on Fifth and Orange
Hmm.
in what used to be their card room. Um,
Nice.
so, you know, Cucalorus was not really ready to make any big moves, but I got convinced a few people to help me get started in this neighborhood. Um, and that's kind of how, I ended up in this part of Wilmington.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I went to high school at New Hanover High School right down the
How
street.
cool.
So I certainly had been there back then and went to Parches every day before school. And so it was kind of an unusual spot. Everybody talked about the Brooklyn Arts District, or,
Mm.
of course, in the in the 90s, lots of artists had studios in the Central Business District,
Hmm.
in very cool spaces above Café Phoenix, other underutilized spaces. Dennis Hopper owned the old Masonic Temple building.
Hmm.
Um, and so we hadn't quite reached that moment where, Front Street was so vibrant and so full that every little space was a an apartment or some, renovated cool space. And so this was a little bit like, man, what are you going to do over there?
Hmm.
Like, wow, but it was affordable. And when my dad was like, hey, you should go check this building out, and I drove around a little bit, it was clear that the Princess Street that area on Princess Street had a lot of buildings that were from the 50s, maybe the 60s, really well built,
Hmm.
that were underutilized or still in their sort of industrial phase. And so I got really excited. I was like, oh, this is going to be a great spot for me. I can make a little impact,
Hmm.
and then hopefully contribute to a larger, kind of evolution, is the way I would put it, of the area.
So you started to paint the picture of what the soda pop, and so I guess back up. So in early 2000, when you moved here, was this area called the soda pop district yet?
No, no, it wasn't
Right.
called anything, to be quite honest. I mean, and an important distinction is that it's the soda pop district on the north side.
Okay.
The soda pop district is a small sort of unit within the larger framework of what is the north side.
Got it.
And that's really important to remember.
Okay.
And we've tried to be a resource for the community, and focusing on the people that are in the community, you know, not just the buildings. Buildings don't really make up a community.
Hmm.
So no, nobody was calling it anything. It was kind of hard to tell people where to go, right? When I was trying to tell people how to get to my art studio,
Yeah.
I didn't really have any real markers. The fire department was relatively new, so you could say, oh, it's near the new fire department,
Hmm.
or you could say it's near Coca-Cola.
Right.
And a lot of people knew that just because it's has a big presence. But no, nobody was really thinking much about this neighborhood. Um, Many of the sort of satellites of downtown hadn't really started to develop at that point.
Hmm.
And so, which was great. I didn't want anybody paying attention to what I was doing. I mean, I was up there chucking, AC coils off the roof without a permit. And so, I really didn't want anybody to really have any idea what I was up to
Yeah.
be honest. And the nature of what I've done over here is is not a profitable business. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of people who are better, maybe doing it better than I could have ever done it, but renting art studios at discounted rates to young artists, running a nonprofit, running a one-screen cinema, these are not high profit ventures.
Yeah.
It's like the most extreme form of entrepreneurship where it's all risk.
Absolutely.
And that's what, I think I thrive on that as a
Yeah.
creative person. I'm really only feel like I'm in the right place if I'm doing something that makes me a little bit uncomfortable and I feel like I'm pushing a boundary. And so I think I landed in exactly the right spot.
Hmm.
And so we started to bring artists into the first building. And just about the time that we filled that building up, I looked across the street, and the building that is now Jengo's Playhouse had a little handwritten sign in the window. It had been Collins Mercantile. And I was like, well, I mean, let's try it again.
Hmm.
And so when we did Jengo's Playhouse, um, I brought the Cucalorus board in. I think we had a 2-hour meeting to decide whether we could pay $200 a month in rent. That was like a big moment because we were getting the card room for free,
Yes.
on Fifth and Orange, I think. I don't remember, but, and so, so then obviously Jengo's evolved sort of in sort of synchronicity with Cucalorus as Cucalorus grew. But very different from what it is today. There was a glass blowing studio in there for many years as
Hmm.
part of Jengo's Playhouse. And so it was about that time, in 2005, when we'd been in the neighborhood for a couple of years and all the studios were full, that we started calling it the Soda Pop District. And it really grew out of telling people how to get there.
Hmm.
And we would say, hey, come down, 10th Street, or come down Princess Street. And when you start seeing soda in the bushes, you'll know that you're near our studio. So Coca-Cola had a dumpster in the back of the building where they threw out all the outdated plastic bottles.
Yeah.
And they didn't care if people in the neighborhood came and grabbed, a couple of 12 packs, and it was never Coca-Cola. It was always Diet Cherry Vanilla Coke, Fresca. It was always the weirdest, of their product line. But everybody would grab more than they could carry. And, a block away, 2 blocks away from the building, you would start to see where people had been like, oh man, I can't carry all this. And you'd see a 12-pack of Fresca shoved under the bushes. And so like, as soon as you start seeing soda in the bushes, you're near our studios, this Soda Pop District. at the same time, I was also like, reading up about neighborhood development,
Hmm.
and had done a little bit of research into art washing, where people were sort of, and still do, sort of take advantage of the marketing appeal of artists and arts activity, but not actually doing anything real to back that up. And I was like, well, we want to create a neighborhood that where there's evidence. There's some historical evidence or some active policy or program that would encourage a certain kind of activity, right? So
Hmm.
that it's authentic, right?
Absolutely.
As storytellers, we want to be authentic. I can't tell somebody else's story and I have to tell my story.
Hmm.
So I didn't have to do much research. I had all of Coke's old files, which included the independent bottling company and the electric bottling company. So at one point there were 3 soda companies in the neighborhood,
Okay.
fully operating, making, I don't remember the exact products. I think one of them might have made Sundrop or, Orange Crush or, whatever the sodas were in the 50s and 60s.
Hmm.
There was also the Varsity Grill right down the street. If you go to the Fisher Student Center at UNCW, they've got a great glass case, and you can see some old photographs from the Varsity Grill in its heyday. And so it kind of, building on that, we took what was a little bit of a joke originally of like there's soda in the bushes, to, this could really be the identity of the neighborhood. Um, and a journalist came to the Cucalorus Film Festival, I think in 2007 or 2008,
Hmm.
and wrote up a article in an Austin newspaper about like the 6 cities in the South that are going to redefine our vision of the South. And Wilmington was one of those. And they mentioned the fact that we were in this new sort of in this neighborhood that was in transition and that we were calling it the Soda Pop District. Somebody in the city of Wilmington read that article and was like, oh, and so somehow from there it went. And a couple years after that, the city funded a study in the neighborhood. And so community members got together. We've been having Soda Pop District meetings for, I think, 18 years now.
Hmm.
They've looked very different because the neighborhood has really evolved more rapidly in recent years. Um, I've my first years here, I absolutely loved the neighborhood. I loved going to the Cook facility. The overnight crew were my buddies, 2 or 3 guys who worked the night shift, which I think was like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Hmm.
And not a lot was happening. They didn't have a whole lot to do, but they had to be there and be, ready when the truck did come in to load it up or whatever.
Hmm.
And it employed a lot of people. It employed a lot of people who lived in the neighborhood. So the 18-wheelers coming in constantly was not the greatest thing. Our porches all had a coat of, diesel dust on it.
Yeah.
Um, and felt a little bit like, I think I might have said this at a city council meeting one time, I felt a little bit like the rear end of this facility was pointing right at our houses, whereas the front on Princess Street, it looked nice, there's the
Yep.
big sign and it's like and then, oh no, why did they put the rear end of this building right in front of our houses? Um, and so, while there's looking back, a little bit romantic of like hanging out with the overnight crew, the reality was we were right next to a distribution facility that
Right.
operated all the time and wasn't a great partner for a residential neighborhood with a lot of elderly community members.
Hmm.
And so it was quite a relief, to be honest, when Coca-Cola moved out to their new facility. And then for maybe 7 years, it was quiet.
Right.
And that was sort of the middle period where it was sort of like this, time of the old industrial activity kind of moved away. The carburetor shop, which is where Highwire
Yep.
Brewing is now,
Hmm.
um, they had moved on, or maybe they were just tapering off in their business as people didn't need carburetors as much. Um, so that period wasn't all bad. I had keys to the Coca-Cola building, would go skateboard in there.
Oh,
I just
cool.
had to keep my eye out for the raccoons that lived in the building. There's some really healthy raccoons living in that building.
Really.
And of course now the current phase. So yeah, it's yeah. Um, very different moment we're in now, which with the neighborhood has an identity that's certainly gone far beyond the soda bushes, soda in the bushes kind of moment.
I love that story. Just, a 12 pack of Sun Drop or whatever. Oh man. So now, what do we consider the boundaries of the soda pop district? Which streets
Yeah,
form that boundary?
if you want to just think of it in terms of buildings, might be the
Okay.
easiest way for people to envision it.
Okay.
New Hanover High School is the anchor
Yep.
on sort of the eastern side of it.
Yep.
And you're pretty close to the anchor on the western side of Market, so
Yep.
running down Market,
Yep.
but on the north side of Market.
Hmm.
Now that's how we've self-identified. And that may change over time, but that was people from the community coming together, talking about it. We had some long meetings talking about, what the boundaries could be. Oh, it should include something on the other side of Market. Oh, it should include the 10th Street Park, but then coming down to what was really, my recollection is that when we were having those conversations, we did talk a lot about what is organically already happening. Let's not create something that we'd like to see happen. Let's actually observe what's really happening and do our best to capture that. And so we just tried to capture the businesses that were operating. So Market Street, New Hanover High School,
Hmm.
kind of down to where we are today, and then over to Chestnut Street, so including some of the commercial properties that are on Chestnut Street.
Right.
Um, and then just sort of a little bit of a trapezoid running from the edges of that,
Hmm.
So trying to define the business district part of it.
Got it.
Now, like any neighborhood, I think there's probably a tapering of kind of identity. And if somebody who lives 2 blocks from, any of these spots wants to say, I live in the soda pop district, and that's, I don't think there needs to be a boundary fence or
Yeah.
out of bounds like on a golf course. I think that's the beautiful thing about neighborhoods is that no one really defines them. They have a life of their own.
And I mean, it should be a compliment. People want to be
Yeah.
associated with this little area, um, and it sounds like, I mean, you've pretty much been the leader, if not one of the leaders, in bringing people together and, creating this little area that's called the Soda Pop District.
I mean, I love doing that work. I love community organizing. I
Yeah.
love bringing people together. I love facilitating people discovering things on their own.
Hmm.
And it's been really cool to get to know lots of people. Some of those people are not in the neighborhood anymore, who the laundromat was one of my favorite spots. It was like a really cool feeling of loading your pocket up with quarters
Hmm.
and going and just talking to people. When you're at the laundromat, you don't have any, you're not going anywhere. It's going to take whatever, an
And this is
hour.
before iPhones and social media, potentially, like
Probably
where people actually like interact and
yes. People really talk. They had magazines, if
yeah,
anybody remembers what they were like,
yeah.
that you could hold.
Uh-huh.
There's something, sort of third placey about a laundromat.
Hmm.
And so the laundromat's not there anymore. That's now Blossom Bay. So there's definitely been a transition in the neighborhood, and the identity of the neighborhood's very different. And so I'd have new hangout spots, right? So instead of the laundromat, I'm going to the Ibis.
Yep.
A couple of constants. Folks Café has been a constant,
Yep.
and it's such a gem. I think if you want to, there's institutions like New Hanover High School
Hmm.
and the fire department, but then there's the real like grassroots, and that's Jengo's Playhouse, that's Folks Café, where people really, there's just something special about those places, right?
Hmm.
And they're very homespun. I mean, anybody who's ever come to Jengo's Playhouse knows that I might be behind the bar working, I might be in the projection booth working, I might be taking the trash out. There's no pretense. It's like, I'm there with my sleeves rolled up. If you ever go to Folks Cafe, it's kind of like going to your grandma's house. It's like, oh, wow, these are the people that run the business who are behind the counter,
That's
and
cool.
so To me, that's one of the reasons that I've loved being in this neighborhood is because of places like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I can't. I mean, I was just this morning. I was out front watering the grass and watering the bushes, and I do have some help taking the trash out. But I started, I was doing that stuff too, and I'm by no means am I trying to compare myself to, the long-lived folks that have been in this area. But I think that there is a sense of, pride and ownership of, hey, we're in this little area, and you've seen so much more change than I have, just, over the past couple of years. But I think it speaks a lot to just, like you said, the people that make up
yeah,
the area.
yeah,
And the buildings and the architecture is definitely, part of it as well. Um, so it's just pretty cool.
yeah. Um,
So now we've actually, like, there's actually signs on the on some of the lampposts that have like soda pop district. What was the process of getting something like that,
it's
approved or registered, or how does that work?
when those first went up, I took a picture immediately and texted it to some of the artists who were part of Wabi Sabi Warehouse
How cool.
many, many years ago, and they all laughed.
Really?
They're like, "That's ridiculous," like, and it's where the world has become a very strange place if there's real signs up based on this sort of like little narrative we started so long ago. Um, but it's still a loosely organized group. Like the Soda Pop District only exists in sort of like spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, I might have started an LLC called Soda Pop District at some point just to protect somebody else from coming in and,
Mm-hmm.
putting their flag in the ground. But it really is not, there's no formal entity. But, I think when the city did the study, it gave it some legitimacy, obviously, right?
Right.
And so then I think you started to see some maps show up with it. So Wilmington Downtown or DBA started to call it that, recognize it that officially. And so the pole banners, Downtown Business Alliance is kind of the pole banner group.
Got it.
And so they came to me and said, hey, we want to do some pole banners. We do tons of pole banners for Cucalorus Film Festival. And so
Yeah.
I put a few up myself. And so that say Jengo's Playhouse on them in the neighborhood. But the truth is that it's, on one hand, I love it. On the other hand, it's a little complicated. I think when white people come into a predominantly black neighborhood or a neighborhood that has such deep history in the black community, that it is complicated. So I often find myself in feeling a little conflicted about my role in that and my obligation to live up to what I consider my values in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so I think sometimes I've felt like I'm mediating, between people who are coming in and people who are already here, and trying to do anything that I can to preserve this sense of continuity and not have this be, a completely foreign place to somebody who maybe grew up here in the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that there's a model for that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the forces at play that push the development of a city or a neighborhood are pretty large and pretty out of reach for a lot of folks. And there aren't, that I know of, a lot of models for, especially in small cities, for that kind of navigating that in a way that's graceful, in a way that respects, complicated histories. And so I have often felt like I'm sort of at this point in the phase of it, a little bit trying to protect, that sort of sense of continuity in that history from people who come in who may not have any understanding of that. So I think moving forward, I feel like I have an obligation to kind of put that history out into the community somewhere,
Absolutely.
And so we'll see what happens in the next part of that. I've done a little bit of research, collecting some photographs from some of the elderly people in the neighborhood.
Hmm.
Um, the strange intersection where Ninth Street terminates and Grace comes up. And it's like this, the road gets really wide and it
Yeah.
doesn't really make sense. How did it end up being so wide for
Yeah.
no reason? And the reason is there used to be a roundabout there. There used to be a fountain and a big like garden in the middle of that
Okay.
intersection. And there was a corner store and so I got some cool photographs of that. So things like that, I would love to, I mean, a dream would be for that fountain to be rebuilt and
Mm.
reimagined there. But even if not, maybe a marker or something. My next part of that research phase is to spend some more time at the North Carolina room at the public library, the local history room at the public library, looking at pre-Coca-Cola.
Hmm.
What did the neighborhood look like?
Yep.
Because clearly it was a lot of houses. So what unusual thing happened
Yep.
that went from being 4 or 5 full city blocks full of homes to it being a facility that made soft drinks, and something was happening at that time. So I haven't dug into that too deeply yet, but I think that's another part that might help to preserve that continuity and to make this neighborhood not feel like it belongs to the invaders, so to
Yeah.
speak.
I mean, that's a very difficult thing to navigate because in balance, because on one hand, you've done a lot of really great things for this area and this community to like, you know, create a place where, there's business, there's commerce, there's people, like, but then to what cost where, like you said, some of the folks that grew up and lived here, might not be able to afford to or other issues. And
Yeah.
it's I don't envy you having to be the
Well, and
liaison on some of
I'm
that,
not the
but
only, the
yeah,
neighborhood's made up of a lot of people, so
yeah,
yeah, that would be sort of crazy to think that I'm totally holding all of that
no, no,
myself.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, um, weaving I think a history of the neighborhood is important to give it a little bit of direction of where it's headed, because even though a lot has been happening in the last couple of years,
hmm,
there's still a good bit of this book that's unwritten in terms of this next phase. So
absolutely.
you've still got a lot of undeveloped property. And
Hmm.
so hopefully we can inform that, influence that in a way that is authentic to, this neighborhood's history, um, and also fun and engaging and creative, and creates opportunities for artists and creates opportunities for people who live in the community to have jobs. And,
Hmm.
that would be very cool if all those things were taken into account. But it's easy for me to say that when somebody else, I feel like I have my little part of it,
Hmm.
and you know, um, I run my main business as a nonprofit, and so we're just fighting to make payroll at the end of the month. You know what I mean?
I
So
hear
it's
you.
like I can talk about big plans, but I run a small nonprofit, and we're really delighted to be in a neighborhood that has some additional amenities in the like a pizza shop, a coffee shop,
Hmm.
ice cream spot, so it's added. The recent developments have made Jengo's Playhouse a much more appealing destination for our customers, because now they can come to the neighborhood and do other things and make a whole night of it.
Yep.
And you know that's been really good for us. Jengo's Playhouse, is an unusual cinema. We call it a community cinema. It's not really a micro cinema. It's not really a movie theater, and a lot of community events. But now that there are other reasons to come to the neighborhood, we're scheduling a lot more screenings. Most of those are through community partnerships. So
Hmm.
we worked with WHQR on Cinematique, we brought that back just recently. We're working with the Cameron Art Museum, doing a series called Cam at the Movies, screening films that are somehow related to exhibitions that are happening there.
Hmm.
So our first one is Legacy, which is a documentary by Adam Alphen about the sculptures on the grounds of the Cameron Art Museum. And then the one after that, which I'm really excited about, is an Andy Warhol movie called Flesh for Frankenstein,
Cool.
um, starring a very young Udo Kier, and Warhol and this guy named Paul Morrissey collaborated on a whole series of films, and I think this is the one that's the most accessible. They're a little bit weird, but
Hmm.
this will be it'll be a fun screening. Yeah, so working with lots of different groups to organize thoughtful and original programming. Most of the screenings we do have a discussion afterwards,
Hmm.
so you get a little bit of like behind the scenes, trivia about the films and how they were made. And a lot of times we have the filmmakers there. Um, so yeah, the evolution of the neighborhood is definitely sort of fed back into the success of Jingo's and its sort of like vibrancy as a community center.
What led you into film and the arts? Is that something that you were always passionate about growing up and something you studied at university or?
You know, I was really almost like my amateur golf career took up all of my time up until I was maybe a sophomore in college.
Hmm.
And I took some art history classes. I read a book called The Tao of Physics and
Hmm.
was like, oh, I have a whole new way of understanding the world, and just really got into art and art history. Took studio classes, spent all my time in the art studio. Um, and so when I graduated from college, I came back here, did all sorts of odd jobs. I worked at the studio a little bit, not much, to be honest, just enough for the people who started Cucalorus to find me. So I worked in the welding shop very briefly on the Muppet movies, and I'm there welding one day, and a guy who looks kind of like me, big curly hair, big personality, named Brent Watkins, came over and goes, "We were told that we should find you, that you might be the kind of guy who would want to be part of what we're doing."
Hmm.
So he invited me to get involved with Cucalorus. So I was a volunteer at Cucalorus, but I worked at the St. John's Museum of Art
Hmm.
doing like lighting, hanging exhibitions, but also like fixing the toilet when it broke, mowing the lawn. You know, there might have been 6 people that worked there when it was downtown. St.
Hmm.
John's Museum of Art, it's where the Children's Museum is now.
Okay.
Um, and man, I was like, it was a very cool job. I got to touch the artwork, it was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, a much different sort of relationship to these sort of special objects. Um, and so, I started having a bit of a studio practice in my spare time. I worked for Dreams,
Hmm.
teaching mosaics and filmmaking. Um, so a lot of young creatives, I was just really piecing together in a bunch of different ways a very meager living. Um, and I lived at Carolina Apartments for a while, sort of following in Claude Howell's footsteps. And I mean, I would never, ever have dreamed that I would run a film organization like Cucalorus Film Foundation. I started volunteering, my first 2 years maybe with Cucalorus, where I was just a volunteer,
Hmm.
along with everybody was a volunteer.
Yep.
I joked that we had a paper bag with $500 in it, that we carried around. It was mainly to buy PBR. Um, was the most important thing at any meeting. We might have had an agenda, but I guarantee you we had a 12-pack of PBR. Um,
Oh
we
my
had
God.
somebody on the crew whose title was the Minister of Libations. You have to earn that these days. You have to put in years of
Yep.
working the bar or whatever. But so I'm very fortunate that through being involved in the arts community, I kind of discovered Cucalorus, or Cucalorus discovered me. And at that time, film festivals weren't really a business. I mean, there were film festivals in the biggest cities in the country,
Right.
and they were largely kind of red carpet events, and during my early years, that started to become an industry because thousands of film festivals were launched in the late 90s, early 2000s. Every city discovered, oh, wow, there's a lot of cool films being made that don't come to our community.
Hmm.
And so Cucalorus was really a sort of a vanguard in that whole movement, because there were filmmakers here and they wanted to show their movies. So a very different setup. A
Hmm.
lot of cities, it was like a group of citizens who were like, oh yeah, we should have a film festival in Milwaukee or wherever,
Yeah.
whatever town
Yeah.
in Raleigh.
Yeah.
But here it was like 11 filmmakers who were like, we need to show our movies to people and we'll do whatever it takes, And so, and that's always been kind of the energy behind Cucalorus, is sort of organized by artists, centering the artist as a contributor to our culture, our economy. And I got to learn how to do my job while doing my job.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified to do my job even today. It's like, thank goodness I got there before anybody else did. I joke with people that I was sitting in our office one day. We've had offices here and there. I think this might have been an office we had at the Timmy building, or maybe it was at the card room at the insurance agency. And somebody called the office and said, hey, who's in charge of Cucalorus? So you guys are all over town, and I mean, there's so many of you. And I looked around the office, and I was the only one there, and so I was like, I'm in charge. I think what they really wanted was they just wanted somebody who could answer a question. So they were tired of like having the question answered in 25 different ways.
Yep.
And they were like, who can really answer my question and give me the, that's probably still a challenge with Cucalorus, is like, who can actually answer your question? Because it's, formally it's a business, it's a nonprofit, but it's actually really in its truest sense, a community of storytellers all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
For many years, there was a group that met up in Brooklyn once a month, Cucalorus people.
No way.
And we didn't have anything to do with it. The home office had nothing to do with it. And they would every once in a while send me a,
How cool.
message to say, hey, man, the Cucalorus New York crew got together last week and whatever, So that's been a real gift for me, the being able to learn my job while doing my job and being part of something that, I think a lot of people, identify Cucalorus with me, but that would be really, that'd be way off. I'm the sort of person who shows up every day to take the trash out,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a much bigger thing, which is very satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked up the job description for a chief instigating officer. I couldn't find one.
Yeah.
All encompassing.
Troublemaker for
Yeah,
the most part.
I love it.
Yeah. Good trouble.
Yeah.
I hope.
Well, we've talked a lot about, and this is, again, I've really enjoyed getting to know you, outside of just like, the film and the arts and in Cucalorus, because every time we're together, we talk about community development, we talk about entrepreneurship, and I think that, that's just a huge part of things that I'm, interested in and involved in, and I'm curious in. I don't know the answer to this question to myself, but how did you find yourself getting, being passionate about, just helping people and connecting people and
Well,
helping build a community? Like, what's that pathway
I'll
like?
say part of my lineage is I'll reference one organization, Alternate Roots, is a group that I've been a part of, which is a 50-year-old nonprofit that is a kind of working at the crossroads between art and activism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a membership organization where every member is a voting member of the board. So it's a participatory democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to really want to be a part of it because it's difficult.
Yeah.
Like certain things that are difficult are worth it. And Alternate Roots was worth it for me. I was the chair of the board for several years. It was kind of like grad school for me. So a lot of the sort of practices and tools that I've built here in Wilmington and through Cucalorus have been inherited through that experience and through amazing people. Alternate Roots started when a group of Southern theater companies got together.
Mm-hmm.
We're tired of people from New York coming down and telling Southern stories. I was like, man, we don't need y'all to tell our stories. Tell our own stories. Somebody from New York coming down here and tell me what it's like to be Southern.
Yep.
That's not necessary.
Yep.
And a lot of work around racial justice, undoing racism. And so I brought some of those tools into it. I mean, the other thing is like I have a very unusual family. I mean, my dad's a retired trial attorney. My mother is a retired Presbyterian minister.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a really interesting, my dad was, it's always really frustrating to have a discussion with my father because you realize really quickly that he could win both sides of the argument. So that it doesn't matter if you're right, that he's just better at the job. It's like people say that about Coach K at Duke. They were like, the thing about Coach K is that he could take your guys and then beat you. So it's like,
Yeah.
And so, I think I got some really sharp analytical skills and a sense of really intense focus from my dad that's
Mm-hmm.
really helped me, and a voracious appetite for learning. I'm
Absolutely.
not sure people realize that that's one of the things that attorneys, trial attorneys especially, they are reading everything they possibly can about whatever it is that their case revolves around, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my dad did a lot of construction law, international shipping,
Mm-hmm.
and so man, he would just bring, and they were just really boring books, right? But he would just read and read and read and read so that he would become an expert on whatever it was, like cargo container, immobilization techniques or whatever, something
Yeah.
ridiculous and
Yeah.
tedious. And so I think I inherited a little bit of that like curiosity from my dad of like really wanting to know about things,
Yeah.
wanting to get at the core of something and understand it. And then my mother, my mom, and we'd go on a trip and she can make friends with anybody, anywhere, and is very empathetic, loves listening to people,
Mm-hmm.
as any minister should be able to talk in front of a big crowd, but also be able to really make you feel seen
Mm-hmm.
when you need them, when you need guidance. And so those two things combined, I think, are really a big part of, this very unusual path that I've taken, which doing a little bit of a lot of different things that don't necessarily go together. But at the end of the day, I have no idea how I ended up here. It's like sometimes I go to work, I'm like, how did this happen? Why does any of this exist? Why is there a 65-seat cinema in sort of downtown
It's
Wilmington?
sort of downtown.
Like in an old metal building. Like it's just like from the front, you're like, okay, this looks like this is somebody got one of those like just a little bit bigger than a garage that somebody got some free paint and made it bright. Hopefully there's a reward that when you go inside, you discover that, oh, this is a kind of like slightly refined space with some really cool, details. So it's like a little bit of a secret. And that's how it feels to me every day. It's like, oh yeah, when you get inside of it, it's like, oh yeah, this is a little more than what you thought it was from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Cucalorus Film Foundation is like that. Jengo's Playhouse is like that. And as you and I have met, I mean, that's probably a little bit of what it's like to hang out with me.
Yeah. So what are you most excited about for the future of, I mean, let's say, the Wilmington downtown area, but also like more specifically, the Soda Pop district?
Well, it's cool for folks like you to come into the neighborhood with new energy. Again, I could have had, Cucalorus could have been here and I could have been here for another 20 years before anything of the current kind of evolution happened, so it's the new ideas that are going to really define the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know that I have a real like strong vision of like this is where it ought to head or anything like that. But since we're talking about it, more community spaces. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing here with the way you have some shared space and the way you're giving an opportunity to some people who are getting started,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really exciting. I think that's one of the things that's appealing about Wilmington for creative people is that since it's a smaller city, you can come to Wilmington and get your foot in the door, in the film industry, in the theater community, not nearly as intimidating as going, to a bigger city, to Atlanta, to New York.
Yeah.
Any number of different places that are just bigger with more people, and so it's a little more crowded to get an opportunity to get some experience. And so it would be very cool if the Soda Pop District continued to be a place where people can come and try out new ideas. I think New Hanover High School definitely influences that.
Hmm.
I've been working with the Spark Lab at New Hanover High School recently, and with their theater department.
Hmm.
They've come to Jengo's and do a little filmmaking workshop. So I'd love to continue. I mean, educational institutions are sometimes hard to pull out because they're focused on what they're doing, which is what they should be doing. But I would love to build the connective tissue between New Hanover High School and everything else in this neighborhood,
Hmm.
so that it doesn't feel like a separate place. And I'd love to have that influence where we're headed, right?
Hmm.
I have no idea what the jobs or opportunities are that are going to be appealing to today's sophomore in high school, but they do.
Hmm.
And so that's exciting to me to kind of navigate that and try to encourage that, try to create that connective tissue. Um, and you know, there's some really big chunks of the neighborhood that are blank, more or less now.
There are.
If I was, you know, a developer who was doing big projects, it would be very cool if we could prioritize attracting some traded sector businesses,
Yep.
you know. And of course, I love the film industry, the music industry. You know, anybody who's making media is really at a exciting crossroads. Now it's high risk, you know, so a lot of developers are probably not really looking
Yep.
to you know, dive into that. Hopefully housing, you know, obviously some of those bigger pieces of the puzzle will be, you know, partly driven by creating housing. Um, and yeah, I mean, who knows? I think that's one of the things that's exciting about being in a, you know, like if we were on Front Street, what's like limited in terms of what changes are going to happen, or you feel a
Hmm.
little bit boxed in, and here it's not. So I'll probably get boxed out once all of that's done. You know, I'll get priced out. The tax values will be so high I won't be able to afford to be here anymore, and I'll go, you know, do something weird in an even smaller city, or you
Yeah.
know. But no, that's not true. I have 5 fig trees that I will be caring for until my last breath. So that's my retirement plan, is to grow my fig empire.
Nice.
Yeah, Seabird's going to have to start just having their whole menu will have to be fig dishes. Um, but no, I'm so deeply rooted in this very specific place, and I
Yep.
think that's, you know, maybe a little bit unusual. I think a lot of people that start businesses and a lot of entrepreneurs think of like, I'm just getting this up and running and then I'm going to turn it into a big bag full of money. I don't
Hmm.
have any interest in that. I'd much rather have a bag full of figs, or
I love that.
bring a bunch of people together to discover new movies. You
That's
know,
so cool.
to me, that's the end result. That's the sort of ultimate um, goal of all the activity, is something a little more mundane, you know, at the end of the day.
Well, that's what keeps you going. I mean, through the ups and the downs. I mean, if you're only doing something for the money, at some point, like you're gonna, you're gonna get out, right? But if there's something more and deeper that's driving you, which is,
Yeah.
is what you just said, is that's how part of I assume how you've been doing it for so long, and part of what wants you to keep doing it is because it's not about the money. It's there's
But
something
we would be
bigger.
happy to have more money.
Yes, let's not.
The Cucalorus Film Foundation is a nonprofit, and so
Yes.
you know, we're in the middle of our sponsorship campaign right now. We're
Yep.
looking for businesses to sponsor the festival in November, and we really, you
Yeah.
know, survive and thrive on businesses in the community that sponsor the festival and individuals that make donations to Cucalorus. And so, yes, if you're loving what you're
Yeah.
hearing, if you
Yeah.
want to help us make those beautiful connections and support independent storytellers,
Yeah.
that's one way that you can get involved.
That's great. I think I've asked all the questions I wanted to. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to
I
that
don't
we
think
should
so. We
bring up?
covered a lot. Thanks for giving me some space to relive some of those good memories and to think about, where we're headed. Yeah,
Well,
really appreciate it,
I
Chris.
appreciate you taking the time, and I'm happy to know you and be able to call you a neighbor here in the Soda Pop District.
Right on, man.
So, thanks.